From the Blues Hotel Collective, welcome to Blues Moments in Time, where every groove holds a memory and every moment echoes the truth of what came before. Today, we rewind the reel, trace the footsteps, and revisit the chapters that shaped the blues. Here is our host, Kelvin Huggins.
Welcome to Blues Moments in Time, the podcast dedicated to exploring the rich history and cultural significance of blues music. Today we're diving into the events that shaped the blues on January 14. Let's start with the cultural landscape. On a January afternoon in 1967, San Francisco's Golden Gate Park turned into something like a psychedelic tent revival. Between 20,000 and 30,000 people gathered for what was called the Human Being, a gathering of tribes that pulled together hippies, Berkeley anti-war activists, mystics, poets, and crucially, musicians. It was a prelude to the Summer of Love, the moment Haight-Ashbury went from local scene to global symbol of counterculture, and the sound pouring off those makeshift stages was steeped in the same Black American roots that gave us the blues. Out there on the grass, long improvisations, modal jams and electric drones were drawing heavily from the structures and feel of the blues, even when the bands called themselves rock or psychedelic. The Human Being helped make that sound a cultural force, normalising extended solos and jam-based performances that owed a clear debt to blues guitar and vocal traditions. It didn't advertise itself as a blues festival, but the DNA was all over it, quietly helping to spread blues phrasing and sensibility into the mainstream of youth culture. And while thousands were turning on and tuning in on the West Coast, another January 14 story was unfolding far away in New Orleans. Back in 1938, a baby named Alan Toussaint had entered the world, a future pianist, songwriter, arranger and producer who would become one of the great architects of New Orleans R&B. Toussaint rarely chased the spotlight, but his work shaped the sound of records heard around the world, blending syncopated grooves, church-inflected chords, and streetwise lyrics that carried the same spirit and grit that we hear in the blues. Even when the label on the record said R&B or funk, the emotional grammar was blues through and through. Now let's turn our attention to the political climate. January 14, 1963. In Montgomery, Alabama, another kind of crowd gathered, this time for an inauguration. George Wallace took the oath of office as governor and delivered a speech that would echo through civil rights history. Segregation now, segregation tomorrow, and segregation forever. Written by a Ku Klux Klan leader, that address made clear that Alabama's highest office was willing to stand against integration and the federal push for civil rights. For the blues, which was born and raised under Jim Crow, this wasn't just a line in a history book. It was the political reality behind the stories the music had been telling for decades. Many of the elders of the tradition, sharecroppers, migrants, working musicians, had lived under the very systems Wallace was defending. His speech spelled out in chillingly plain language the forces that had shaped their lives. Segregated schools, segregated buses, segregated venues, segregated everything. Yet the same moment of hardline resistance helped fuel a stronger civil rights movement. As the struggle intensified, so did the music of resistance, freedom songs, spirituals, folk blues, and later soul and urban blues that weren't afraid to name injustice. The political fire it lit around January 14, 1963 helped turn blues from a private lament into a public witness for many listeners. Not just stories from a hard life, but testimony against a system that insisted that forever should look like segregation. Of course, no discussion of blues history would be complete without exploring the music itself. If you flip through the standard on this day in music calendars, January 14 doesn't jump out as the date of a legendary blues recording session or a defining Chicago club gig. Instead, you'll see classical premieres, major rock releases and pop milestones like David Bowie's experimental turns and big chart moments for soul and rock acts that dominated the airwaves. But here's the twist. Many of those now classic records leaned heavily on blues structures, blue notes, call and response patterns, and the emotional directness that blues pioneered. That's the quiet story of January 14 in music. The blues isn't always at the centre of the headline, but it's in the subtext of the sound. On the West Coast, the Human Being launched a psychedelic wave that drew from blues and R&B in New Orleans and Alabama. Musicians and audiences carried a lifetime of blues feeling into their work and their struggles. So even on a date without a single famous blues event, the music is there, haunting guitar lines behind rock anthems, gospel-soaked harmonies under pop hits, and soulful phrasing that traces straight back to the juke joints. January 14 has also marked the beginning of life for some incredible blues musicians. Let's begin in Montgomery, Alabama in 1936. A baby is born blind, but grows up with a voice and a guitar that can slice straight through a crowded room. His name is Clarence Carter. By the late 1960s, Carter is cutting records that fuse deep blues feeling with southern soul production, songs like Slip Away and Backdoor Santa that managed to be radio friendly and raw at the same time. In 1970, he releases Patches, a country soul masterpiece that tells the story of a young boy, dirt poor and determined, doing everything he can to carry his family forward. Carter's catalogue is packed with the themes that have always animated the blues: hard love, betrayal, survival, humour in the face of humiliation, and a stubborn hope that refuses to die. But his sound also shows how blues evolved, how it moved onto the airwaves, into cars and living rooms, smuggled inside soul arrangements and pop-leaning hooks, reaching listeners who might never have set foot in a Mississippi juke joint. 2 years after Carter's birth, on January 14, 1938, Alan Toussaint arrives in New Orleans. He will become one of the great behind-the-scenes geniuses of American music, a pianist, songwriter, arranger and producer whose work from the 1950s onward helps define what New Orleans rhythm and blues sounds like. Toussaint's approach to groove, harmony and melody reflects the same black southern stew that fed the blues. Church rhythms, street parades, piano figures that feel like they've been heard on every corner of the neighbourhood. He is often described as one of popular music's great backroom figures, because so many of his contributions come from the producer's chair, the arranger's pen, or the songwriter's notebook rather than the spotlight. But his choices, what instruments to use, how the horns punch, how the piano rolls, shaped generations of records that carried blues spirit into R&B, funk and rock. On January 14, in other words, the blues doesn't just gain performers, it gains architects. And sadly, January 14 has also been a day of loss. When we look at January 14 across the usual deaths in music lists, something striking emerges. There are very few, if any, core blues legends whose lives end on this date. Instead, we find classical composers, musicologists, and artists from other genres. On paper, it seems like January 4 is very quiet. But if we zoom out, there's another kind of loss written into this day. In 1963, George Wallace's inaugural promise of segregation forever tries to lock in place the very conditions that the blues had been mourning and resisting since its earliest field holders. its political attempt to freeze inequality in time to make permanent the losses of opportunity, of safety, of dignity that shaped the lives of so many blues creators. January 14 holds fewer funerals for specific blues icons and more reminders of the structures that endangered them in the first place. So when we mark January 14 as a day of loss in blues history, we're really talking about something bigger than a single musician's passing. We're talking about the loss that segregation tried to make permanent, and also the loss that the counterculture tried to ease by reaching for new forms of community, consciousness and sound. The blues, as always, stands in the middle, naming the hurt, carrying the memory, and refusing to let the story end there. And that's all the time that we have for today's episode of Blues Moments in Time. Join us again next time as we continue to explore the fascinating history of the blues.